Welcome to the Reischauer Memorial Lecture here at Johns Hopkins University SAIS in Washington, D.C. I'm Kent Calder, the director of the Reischauer Center for East Asian Studies here at SAIS, and I join my Reischauer Center colleagues in welcoming you. The Reischauer Memorial Lecture is a tradition of our center that dates back to the year of my arrival here at SAIS in 2003 to honor the memory of Ambassador Edwin O. Reischauer, my own personal mentor, who served as John F. Kennedy's ambassador to Japan and played such an important role in U.S.-Japan political, cultural, and intellectual relations. We've had many distinguished memorial lecturers over the years, including in the first year Makoto Kuroda, currently governor of the Bank of Japan. This year is particularly auspicious as Professor Reischauer was born on November 10th, 1910, so we were only a few days past the 110th anniversary of his birth. This year, it gives me great pleasure, tremendous personal pleasure, to introduce a friend of over 40 years since our days working together at the Harvard U.S.-Japan program. Our speaker has played a truly illustrious and meaningful role in the history, both of his own country and of U.S.-Japan relations. This event gives me personally particular pleasure because we first knew each other as we both worked under the direction of Professor Reischauer himself during a time when he was chairman of the U.S.-Japan program with which we were affiliated. I can still remember walking to the small white clapboard house at 6 Kirtland Avenue in Cambridge, which still stands, and the interesting discussions that Dr. Takenaka and I, together with our other program colleagues, had in that small conference room there. In more recent years, our speaker has risen to become one of Japan's foremost economic statesmen and thought leaders, who even today continues to contribute significantly to global policy debates, as no doubt most of us know. He currently is serving as a professor in the Global Innovation Department of the innovative Toyo University, and he is also a Professor Emeritus at Keio University in Japan. He serves in a broad range of broader public roles. He's a board member of the World Economic Forum Foundation, where he's been active for over a decade, since 2017. He's the chairman of the Pasona Group. He's a board member of Orix Corporation. He's the chairman of Academyhills in Tokyo, and of course has played a number of major policy roles across the past 2 decades, as many of you know. He served, Dr. Takenaka served as Minister of Economics and Fiscal Policy, really the chief economic advisor of Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi in Japan from 2001 to 2005. He also served as Minister for Internal Affairs and Communications from 2005 to 6, where he was the key author of Postal Privatization in Japan. He has served in the Japanese House of Councilors, and he also served on the Economic Policy Council of Prime Minister Abe. Dr. Takenaka is an economics graduate of Hitotsubashi University with a PhD in economics from Osaka, and served, as I mentioned, as visiting scholar at Harvard University and frequently lectures at a range of universities and other institutions around the world. So it gives me a great deal of pleasure today To introduce our speaker, our memorial lecturer, Dr. Heizo Takenaka, to speak on the Japanese economy under this Suga administration. Dr. Takenaka, so it's wonderful to see you here.
Well, thank you very, very much for a very nice introduction, Kent, my good friend. Well, it is my great pleasure and honor to appear at this Reischauer Memorial Lecture. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to Dr. Kent Calder and all members of the Reischauer Center of Johns Hopkins University. Yes, as was mentioned by Kent, I remember my first day at Harvard US Japan programs. Dr. Kent Calder was the very first person that I met at Harvard University in my school life. And also, he very kindly taught everything about US-Japan relations, etc., etc. This was a very good start for my study on the United States and Japan relations. So anyway, my role is anyway to speak about new Prime Minister Suga and his economic policy and US-Japan relations, etc., etc. Let me try to provoke your thought by providing some materials to be discussed. Well, Mr. Yoshihide Suga was nominated as Prime Minister of Japan, succeeding Shinzo Abe 2 months ago. As you know, the former Prime Minister, Mr. Abe, realized the longest lasting cabinet in the history of Japan politics. Very regrettably, Mr. Abe had to step down because of his health problem. Well, in the Abe administration, former government, Mr. Suga acted as a chief cabinet secretary for more than 7 years, showing his high capability of policy management. Well, Mr. Suga was a real man of influence in Abe government. Now then, Mr. Suga was elected as the governor of LDP, the ruling party, and elected as the prime minister, supported by overwhelming majority of LDP Diet members. And Mr. Suga explicitly stated that he would succeed Abe's policy. It is quite reasonable to say so because he served as a chief cabinet secretary, number 2 position in the cabinet for more than 7 years. In a sense, so he is the most legitimate successor of Abe's economic policy, Abenomics. Well, as for Abenomics, some of you already have some information. There are 3 components of the policies. The first one is a very bold monetary expansion to conquer deflation. While Japan has been suffering from very persistent deflation for many, many years. So in order to conquer this kind of deflation, a very bold monetary policy was needed. And this was done to some extent, yes. The second policy, we say second arrow, 3 arrows, and the first arrow is monetary expansion. The second arrow is the very flexible fiscal policy. Flexible fiscal policy means, well, in the short run, fiscal expansion is needed to stimulate the economy, to recover the economy. However, in the mid-term and long run, fiscal consolidation is needed. Maybe you understand that Japanese government is carrying huge amount of government debt. So in the long run, fiscal rehabilitation is needed, fiscal consolidation is needed. However, in the short run, some stimulus package is needed. This is the flexible fiscal policy. And the third arrow is the bold growth strategy. This is a very important and attention-grabbing task. The economic reform, still, we have a lot of regulations in the social system and economic system. So deregulation is needed, and the various kind of structural reform is needed. This is the third arrow. And as I mentioned, Mr. Suga stated to succeed these policy packages. At the same time, he stressed the importance of the third arrow. He promised to strengthen the third arrow of structural reform, especially deregulation. This is the basic framework of Mr. Suga's policy already shown. Well, for the time being, most important task, however, for Mr. Suga is to take an appropriate macroeconomic management. But in the second quarter of this year, GDP growth rate was minus 28%. In the second quarter, growth rate was minus 28%. This was, of course, the largest decline of GDP since GDP statistics was first estimated. In the third quarter, GDP growth rate was announced at the beginning of this week. The result was positive 21%, positive 20%, 21%. So the economy is recovering. It is true, but the speed of recovery is not so high, not enough. So under such circumstances, another wave of COVID attack is coming. Well, in the past week or so, the number of infected by COVID-19 is increasing. So the situation is not so easy. So Prime Minister made a decision to take additional stimulus package. Well, honestly speaking, former Prime Minister Abe already provided huge amount of second supplementary budget, reaching 60 trillion yen level. This is indicating the size of the general account increases by 60%. This is a big increase. Also, in the case of Japan, the rate of unemployment is as low as 3%. The rate of unemployment slightly increased from 2.5% to 3%. But still, this level is very low. So stimulus package is so prepared by the previous government. Still, I think Prime Minister Suga is going to provide another stimulus package towards the end of this year. He's also considering the best timing of snap election. Well, this will of course relate to the formation of the additional supplementary budget. Well, when the snap election will be taken, this is another important factor to be considered in case we discuss the Japan's economy and the politics. Anyway, Prime Minister Suga places more importance on economic recovery rather than fiscal rehabilitation at this moment. This is very clear. The important point is that in the case of Japan, the death ratio to the total national population is fortunately low. The death ratio to the total population is very low in Japan. To be specific, the death ratio in the United States is about 40 times of that of Japan. And in France, this ratio is 100 times of that of Japan. This is indicating, of course, we are suffering from COVID-19. However, fortunately at this moment, the death ratio to the total population is very low in Japan. Well, so Prime Minister has a very positive attitude toward economic stimulus rather than restraining people's and businesses' activities. Mr. Suga is very eager to activate the economic conditions. The Cabinet Office of the government so predicts that we will see a positive growth, economic growth in the next year. This is the focus by Cabinet Office. However, we should be a little more cautious on the economic situation. We cannot be so optimistic. I'm not pessimist, but we cannot be so optimistic. Some cautious optimism is needed. Just for your reference, the Japan Center for Economic Research, this Japan Center for Economic Research is the oldest economic think tank in Japan. This think tank predicts that it will take 4 years or so before we see the full recovery of the economy. And meanwhile, there is a possibility of asset inflation because of very expansionary monetary policy. Whereas, as I mentioned, in the second quarter, GDP declined by 28% at the annual base. However, stock price increased steadily, and also real estate price increased steadily. In that sense, there is a slight possibility of asset inflation. We should be very careful on that point. Well, When I had a private conversation with Prime Minister Suga several months ago, I raised the question to him. What is the first prioritized policy for you? And what do you want to do the most as a political leader? Mr. Suga answered that he would change a vertically divided administration system, or he would destroy a sectionalism among ministries. This is an important base to promote an active reform policy. Well, he often raises the following episode. This is his most favorite episode. Last year, Japan was attacked by extraordinarily heavy rain. At that time, how to discharge dam water became a very serious problem to avoid flood. But at that time, we first understood that there are three kinds of dams in the country. Do you know that there are three kinds of dams in the country? One is the dams controlled by Ministry of Land. The second one is the one ministry controlled by Ministry of Economy and Trade. And third category was the one controlled by Ministry of Agriculture. And amazingly, these ministries did not exchange data and information. Mr. Suga, as a chief cabinet secretary, called up the head of three ministries and decided optimum volume of dam water discharge. This kind of sectionalism can be seen quite often in Japanese ministries. So this time, Mr. Suga promised to establish the Agency of Digital Affairs, or Digital Agency. The main purpose, of course, is to accelerate the digital transformation that became inevitable under COVID-19 crisis. For example, where remote education is needed, where remote work is needed, remote medical service is needed, so digital transformation is needed. At the same time, Mr. Suga is expecting to change vertically divided administration system through this new agency. I mean, digitalization will bring about cross-functional effect on each ministry, cross-functional effect. Digitalization does not mean just an introduction of IT equipment. It means that whole decision-making system, the whole working style and organization should be changed. So digital agency is highly expected to play a very important role in the new cabinet, so that Prime Minister can realize the reform. At the same time, the role of Minister of Administrative Reform and Regulatory Reform is also very important. Digitalization should be accompanied by regulatory reform. So for that purpose, Mr. Taro Kono was nominated as a Minister for Deregulation. Mr. Kono is, as you know, a very popular and very promising minister, politician in Japan. So this is a very attention-grabbing point. Well, I would like to also introduce another new policies by new Prime Minister Suga. Well, in the very first Diet speech the other day, Mr. Suga clearly declared that Japan will realize emission-free, emission zero by 2050. Of course, some people have been insisting the need for this realization, emission-free, emission zero by 2050. However, business leaders, Economic Federation of Japan, and also Ministry of Economy had been strongly against that, because this kind of policy will increase, or provide a burden on the industry's cost expenditures. However, very clearly, the Prime Minister promised to realize emission-free by 2050. So, well, we are now expecting that so-called green, New Deal type of policy should be realized, Green New Deal. And I'm personally recommending Prime Minister to establish so-called green fund. As I mentioned, the Prime Minister is going to provide a relatively large scale of supplementary budget. So in this regard, building or establishing green fund will be very effective. I'm expecting that. And also another attention grabbing new policy for him is to build the super city. Super city. Well, you know that we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. However, to realize that, we need some strong deregulation. Please consider the self-driving or auto-driving car. Well, but however, this is prohibited in Japan because of the very strict traffic law. In case the automobile express runs on the public road, the driver should be there. This is the regulation by traffic law. Still, of course, we have technology in the automobile, technology in sensor, technology in camera. However, test driving cannot be done easily. So under such circumstances, well, Japanese economy a little bit lagged behind this fourth industrial revolution competition, while though we have a technology. So, well, Prime Minister decided to establish a super smart city, super city. This is a kind of future city, gathering all technologies, the future city. Well, for that also, digital fund. I'm recommending to establish a digital fund to realize this super smart city. At this moment, some cities, local cities in Japan, including Osaka, is planning to employ this policy framework of super smart city. And well, this is another promising and good, interesting policy by new Prime Minister Suga. But anyway, in order to promote these reform policies, political leadership by Prime Minister is needed. Kent, you are a very specialist of Japan politics, so there exists an iron triangle in the policymaking system, the bureaucrats and the vested interest group and some politicians supported by this vested interest group are always strongly against the regulatory reform. So the leadership by Prime Minister is necessary. For that purpose, Prime Minister repositioned the policy councils, repositioned the Council on Economic and Fiscal Policy and Regulatory Reform Council at the front and center of the administration, he said clearly. Also, he created a new board named Growth Strategy Council to complement the two economic councils. While among these councils, industrial revitalization is considered to be a key issue going forward. Well, as I mentioned, Abe government made a great success to revitalize the economy to some extent. However, in the first half of the Abe government, Prime Minister could show his strong leadership for the reform. However, in the latter part of the administration, because of some scandals, Prime Minister became a little bit hesitant to show his leadership. This is my recognition. So under such circumstances, new Prime Minister Suga provided a new policy councils so that they can show his strong leadership by Prime Minister. Well, as I mentioned, economy is recovering, but its pace is slow. Now in Japan, the rate of unemployment is low, around 3%, as I mentioned, and the number of bankruptcy filing is also low. Well, GDP declined by 28%. However, the number of bankruptcy filing is very low. But on the other hand, it is reported that 7 times as many firms have closed their businesses. So these companies have given up on business continuity and left the market. So in that sense, while so far the government policy had been stopping the they decline, hard crash, but the situation is not so easy to recover that. Another area to look at is the rapid expansion of corporate debt. Corporate debt, I mean long-term and short-term loans and the corporate bonds. This government debt has increased by 35 trillion yen, or about 7% in just 3 months. It's a dramatic increase by any means if we consider the fact that the debt increase was about 100 trillion yen over the 4 years after the bubble economy collapsed. At that time, banking sector has bad debt, and the corporate sector is approaching the point of excess debt. In other words, the Japanese industrial sector needs now to start readjusting its balance sheet. So balance sheet adjustment is will be needed sooner or later. Anyway, under such circumstances, economic policy led by Prime Minister's strong leadership is needed. Well, so in this regard, I should mention a little bit about political stability. Well, Mr. Suga was elected overwhelming majority by in the Diet. However, while in the Japanese politics, especially in the ruling parties, the role of the faction is still very important. In usual case, the head of the big faction can become the prime minister. However, in the case of Mr. Suga, he does not have his own faction. He does not belong to any major faction. So in that sense, he's the first prime minister who became the power not belonging to the faction. Well, this is indicating, well, his political position is not very strong. At this moment, supporting ratio is very high, so all factions are very quiet and supporting Mr. Suga. However, if supporting ratio declined, well, in this case, other factions will attack the prime minister. Well, we have the nightmare where before Mr. Abe took office, where every year, almost every year, prime minister changed. This kind of political instability will worsen the economy again. So anyway, in order to stabilize the political situation, it is important for Mr. Suga to keep high supporting ratio. So then in order to keep this high supporting ratio, I recommended the Prime Minister, you need early small success. Early small success. Even if it's a small success, that's okay, but early success is needed. Based upon that, well, the people will realize, oh, this new Prime Minister is very promising, we expect a lot on his capability, etc., etc. So in this regard, I think Mr. Suga in that sense is very smart. He is now proposing to decrease the communication cost or mobile phone cost. While in Japan, well in usual case, in all societies, mobile phone load is very important. But in the case of Japan, this cost is communication cost, and the mobile phone cost is one of the highest in the world. Highest are New York City or Tokyo. Well, so he promised to reduce that by 20%, 40%, I'm not sure. Well, this market is now under the oligopoly by 3 major companies. And the price for consumer is very high. Their profitability is high. So under such circumstances, Prime Minister is going to introduce a very fair competition. So if this is realized, this will become the early small success for the new government. Well, in this regard also, I have to mention the possibility of snap election. Well, when Prime Minister Suga took office, there were 3 kinds of criticisms. Well, all of a sudden, former Prime Minister Abe stepped down. So among party members, they didn't have any election. This is a very emergent situation. So Prime Minister Suga was elected by only Diet members. So this is indicating there is no evidence that the people are supporting, but the legitimacy is still doubted. This is the first criticism. The second one is, his term ends the next year. He was all of a sudden nominated as prime minister, so his term is just to remaining term of Mr. Abe is only his Prime Minister Suga's term, so 1 year. So some people criticize this is a very tentative choice of the ruling party, not a long-lasting government, etc., etc. And third comment will be, well, sooner or later, supporting ratio will decline. So it's very difficult to continue his government. So in order to fight against these three criticisms, well, there's the easy solution. Well, all of a sudden, now, the snap election should be held. Then, since supporting ratio is high, he will win. If he wins in the election, he can continue his term. They'll be longer. So he doesn't pay much attention to the movement of the supporting ratio. However, Prime Minister rejected that at the beginning of this month, so at the beginning of his term. So he now focuses on the anti-COVID-19 policy and economic revitalization policy, etc. But sooner or later, snap election will be held because the term of the lower house will end the next year's autumn next year. So only remaining possibility is the beginning of at the beginning of next year, or in September or so, because Japan is still going to host the Paralympic game in the summer. So from spring to summer, it's very difficult to have snap election. Also, in July, Tokyo, Tokyo Metropolitan Government, the Assembly, the election will be held. So, only remaining choice for snap election, if any, will be the beginning of next year, or beyond the summer. So, in that sense, Prime Minister will face a very difficult, challenging choice to choose the snap election. So now, Prime Minister ordered to have the supplementary budget. The size of the supplementary budget will be influenced by the timing of snap election. This is a very attention-grabbing point. Now then, I would like to mention a little bit about the foreign diplomacy and US-Japan relations. Well, it is often criticized that Mr. Suga does not have an experience of foreign diplomacy. Yes, it is true. He does not have experience of foreign minister. He does not have an experience of trade negotiator. But still, as I mentioned, he had been acting as a chief cabinet secretary of the government for more than 7 years. Well, chief cabinet secretary is always in the center of the policy decision making. Well, for example, when former Prime Minister Abe is going to make an address in the United Nations General Assembly, in this case, Chief Cabinet Secretary, joined the writing his address, and also when former Prime Minister had a telephone conference with Mr. Trump, well, Mr. Suga was just sitting next to Prime Minister, and in that sense, he already has a very good experience of international the foreign diplomacy, I think. And so, of course, for Japan, the United States is the most important country and allied country, especially from the viewpoint of security. The US role is very important for us. He will understand that. At the same time, China is also an important strategic partner or trade partner. About 20 to 25% of total Japanese export imports are dependent on China. Well, this balance is very important for Japan. Let me repeat, the United States is the most important allied country. This is a very definite position. Concept and the free and open Indo-Pacific, free and Indo-Pacific concept is firmly maintained in the new government by new prime minister. Suga especially places great importance on the value of the rule of the law. Rule of the law is very important. He will understand that. So he will strongly advocate the need for free and open Indo-Pacific. So anyway, as Chief Cabinet Secretary, he served for 7 years. So he will do this job for foreign diplomacy without any hindrance, I think. Well, Japan had been receiving huge benefit from liberal world order. Well, in this liberal world order, I mean free trade. Free trade is important, and multilateralism is important, and globalization, this is important. These are important factors of free liberal world order, and we had been getting great benefit from world order, liberal world order. And the rule maker of this liberal world order was, the rule maker was the United States. But I understand the United States now has difficult problems. Japan cannot be a rule maker, but can be and should be the rule shaper. To be specific, Japan led TPP-11 and RCEP. The other day, we signed the RCEP. Well, honestly speaking, Japanese people are waiting that the United States is coming back to TPP, and also in the RCEP, China is included, as you know. And Japan is joining both TPP-11 and RCEP. So mega FTA is very important, and Japan is joining for these two. And also Japan has economic partnership agreement with the EU. Japan is going to play a very important role as the rule shaper of the free trade. This kind of effort will be continued by the Suga administration, I believe. Many people in Japan are worrying about decoupling of the global economy, most specifically the confrontation between the United States and China. Later, I'd like to hear on this point from Dr. Kent Calder and my friend in the United States. Well, many people, Japanese people, are worrying about the decoupling of the global economy. Well, anyway, Mr. Suga, in a sense, a very unique politician. He was born in Akita Prefecture, a very rural area in Japan. And after graduating from high school, he came to Tokyo, getting a job in the small factory. He worked in this factory for 2 years. Then he joined the night school of university while working daytime. Then he worked as a secretary to LDP that man, and at the age of 39, he first became a city council member of Yokohama City. Finally, at the age of 47, he was elected as a member of the lower house, but its process was very tough, I think. We can say that Mr. Suga is a very right person who has realized not American dream, but the Japanese dream, I think. I worked with him when I was Minister for Internal Affairs and Communication, and he succeeded me as a minister in the first Abe cabinet. Mr. Suga is respected and sometimes feared by Katsumigaseki bureaucrats because his power of political muscle. He has a very strong political muscle. He's a very patient person and a very logical person. From time to time, he makes use of his power of personnel reshuffling for bureaucrats. He's very good at personnel management. Anyway, new prime minister took office 2 months ago in Japan. And we're expecting a lot on his policy, reform policy. Also, in the United States, there's a possibility, in my understanding, the new president is taking office. I really hope that another round of good US-Japan relations will be realized between two leaders. Well, I spoke maybe for 40 minutes or so. Thank you very much for your attention. I really hope to enjoy the discussion with Dr. Kent Calder and other members joining this seminar. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Heizo. That was absolutely fascinating, and I can certainly see in our Q&A questions beginning to pile up. We look forward certainly to a broad discussion of questions from all of our community here, but I did have a few specific questions and reactions to some of what you said. This being Johns Hopkins University, where of course the progress of COVID-19 and overcoming this tragic crisis that we're in is certainly a major concern of ours. Last week we did a major conference with the T20 Global Think Tank Summit relating to policies on COVID-19. And of course, in the last week, we've had announcements of a couple of promising vaccine possibilities, including one from Pfizer and in cooperation with Germany, that I think, I'm not certain of all the details, that there is also some involvement with Japan. And I just wondered how the arrival, the likely relatively early arrival of a vaccine might affect the Japanese economy, how the recent vaccine developments are being seen in Japan, and how that might affect some of the policies of the Suga administration.
Well, thank you very much, Kent, for raising a very important question, COVID-19 and the vaccine. Well, very honestly speaking, I feel a lot of difference between the expectation on vaccine, between Asian countries and Western countries. In the case of Western countries, as I mentioned, the death ratio to the total population is very low. So of course we expect the early arrival of vaccine. However, at the same time, we sometimes say, well, it will take several years before we get the perfect vaccine. So on the other hand, in my impression, when we have a discussion with board members, World Economic Forum members, they love the discussion on vaccine. Maybe this is indicating for Western countries, vaccines are really needed. But in the case of Japan, of course, we expect that. However, this feeling is a little bit different. Well, of course, at the same time, to stabilize the society, our Prime Minister and the political leaders promised to get the vaccine as soon as possible. However, honestly speaking, the Japanese pharmaceutical companies' power is not very strong in this field. So the government has a contract with American companies and some other European countries, etc. So the government already provided a certain amount of vaccine if it is developed. But honestly, as I mentioned, well, people or Japanese people are not so expecting early. We are not so optimistic about the early arrival of vaccine. Based upon our experience. For example, in the case of we had SARS in the year 2003. We do not have SARS vaccine yet. And even in the case of the AIDS, we don't have vaccine yet. So we are relatively cool that understanding that the vaccine production is not so easy. And regarding vaccine, we have another kind of discussion. Well, we sometimes use the term vaccine nationalism. Vaccine nationalism. For example, major industrialized countries already have the promise getting vaccine. The number is about 2.5 times of the population, 2.5 times the population. However, in the case of the low-income countries in African continent, they have only 14%. In industrial countries, 2.5 times, 250% of vaccine is already promised to get if it's completed. But this is called the vaccine nationalism. So where we should pay more attention on this point. This is the general feeling on the Japanese people on vaccine.
Precisely on that point, if I might just continue with one related question concerning this COVID-19 situation that, of course, is so important for the world as a whole. Now, Japan is one of the largest donors of foreign aid in the world, and particularly in Asia. It has played an extremely important role in countries such as India, for example. And there are a whole variety of health problems that are arising out of the COVID pandemic, not only mortalities, but all kinds of new health problems that are arising, effects on people's infirmity and growth and mental situation. And Japan recently, we had JICA involved heavily in our last webinar. And the point, and I know that President Kitaoka as well has raised this, the issue of Japanese health assistance in the developing world. You talked about vaccine nationalism, about certain advanced countries in particular benefiting early on. And of course, there are many major health problems in the developing world remaining, and China is talking about aiding those areas also. How do you see, just very briefly, the Suga administration's policies in the post-COVID world on health assistance and so on to some of the lingering effects of COVID?
Well, thank you very much for raising another important and very interesting point. Well, Japan's ODA, we have sometimes very serious discussions on that. Well, how about one is the volume of ODA? Of course, we have to increase that. At the same time, the components of ODA. Well, so far, Japan's ODA mostly focused infrastructure building. And health-related ODA, the share was quite limited compared with the American and European countries. So JICA and some other organizations are now going to increase this component, health-related ODA. Because Japan now, generally speaking, Japanese people enjoying relatively good health conditions. Life expectancy, average life is very long. So this is indicating medical service situation and health situation, healthcare is very good in this country. So we have to provide this kind of know-how and together with money to developing countries. This role is highly expected, I understand. But as I mentioned, so far, Japan's ODA has been focusing on strengthening infrastructure. Now, we are now in the turning point. We should change the focus from infrastructure to healthcare related ODA. Kent, may I raise one point regarding COVID-19, this crisis, Japan? So this is not related directly to ODA. Well, this kind of crisis, at that time, our strengths, our weakness are both exposed. Well, we have some strengths. Well, Japanese people well take care of their health, wearing masks and washing hands, etc., etc. And the result, mostly, the situation is not very bad compared with some European countries. However, one weakness was exposed this time. This is the governance of the society. Well, the declaration of emergency, this was dispatched by Prime Minister at the beginning of April. However, in this country, Japan, we do not have any system to order the private sector. Even Prime Minister cannot order to stop something, to close the restaurant, etc. They cannot order. They just ask or request or suggest. Of course, some countries understand have this kind of system to order, and if people are against this order, some punishment or some sanctions could be possible. In the case of the United States, I understand you have a special law, Defense Production Act or something like Kokubo Seisanho, right?
Production.
Yeah, and you have, so the government ordered some companies to produce some this kind of that.
Right.
But we do not have that kind of system to order, just suggest. So, well, this is indicating we do not assume some emergency comes. Well, we do not, people do not assume there could be war, there could be crisis. So this is a very, very serious weakness of our society. So this is the problem with the social governance. So maybe at the beginning of next year, well, I expect the government will change the infection-related law so that in some cases, Japan, the government can dispatch the order to stop something like that. This kind of system is now should be discussed very seriously for Japan.
That's very interesting. That suggests perhaps a more decisive government role in some of these areas. And I think certainly the Biden administration is looking to that sort of thing. You know, there's needless to say, a major issue between our countries going forward is going to be a possible forthcoming dialogue between Prime Minister Suga and President-elect Biden, soon to be President Biden, I suppose. And that certainly is an issue I wanted to get into, but I thought to preface what I am sure I even see from the chat many questions, or rather our Q&A, many questions relating to this possibility of a visit of Prime Minister Suga and the dialogue between Prime Minister Suga and President-to-be Biden. But to preface that, if I might just say a word or two of what I take out of the really unique things that you've said about Japan's domestic situation. And what I would like to ask you is how those relate to what you think might be some productive items for U.S.-Japan discussion. To be specific, you mentioned earlier digitalization and the very creative policies of Prime Minister Suga on digitalization. Of course, some other countries in the Pacific also have been very active, either countries or governments. In Korea, for example, in Taiwan, in Singapore, digitalization has been a major part of the response to COVID, very creative adaptations of that. The United States clearly has a lot of capabilities in the digital area. Some areas like telemedicine, we're proceeding quite rapidly. But one issue I'm sure many would like to ask about is a digitalization agenda for the United States and Japan as we move toward a possible visit or dialogue between President or Prime Minister Suga and President Biden. Another issue that you raised was, well, the debt issue. You noted how serious, how corporate debt in some ways is becoming more serious. In the last few months, it has sharply increased in Japan. Needless to say, in the United States, where COVID has been much more serious. The impact on small businesses, we have had trouble agreeing on our next stimulus package, but no doubt at the latest when President to be Biden comes in, that one is going to be there. So the US will have a major stimulus, I suppose, but the debt level is high. The third world, of course, has serious debt problems. For the post-COVID world, debt is going to be very serious. Where do the United States and Japan stand in that regard? And then another question, again, health security. Given that the shadow of COVID is standing behind us, as the leaders get together, what can they say that will be reassuring in that area? I guess the final question, you mentioned early fruits or attractive early measures, and I thought what you had to say about mobile phones, the possibility that Prime Minister can cut those, that sounds like a wonderful thing for the Japanese people. Are there any early fruits that on the US-Japan relations side that might be attractive for Suga, or is the US-Japan relationship simply a set of burdens for Prime Minister Suga?
Well, thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you
so
very
many
much.
questions.
Well, thank you very much for raising so many difficult questions. Well, regarding U.S.-Japan relations, so there could be many things to be done. For example, regarding digitalization, cybersecurity is the most important task that for which we should cooperate each other. Cybersecurity, especially Silicon Valley has a very special technology on this point. While digitalization will be promoted here in Japan, still we need some help from the United States because the number of digital specialists will suffer from the shortage of the digital technology specialists. So, well, in this regard, the human exchange or human support is very important. Well, very regulatory in the case of Japanese universities, a personnel system is very inflexible. So the digital technology or IT-related technology field is not very developed because, because of the lifetime employment of the professor system, but very old type of engineering type of professors are sitting in the past. So we need help, human help in this area, especially human security. Another important area where we should cooperate is data's free flow with trust. Data free flow with trust. Data privacy is very important. However, data flow is also important. Well, in my understanding, the China sometimes ignore the data security. And European countries, on the contrary, places too much on this data security, and sometimes ignoring, or not ignoring, but ignoring some data flow. So data flow is needed. The privacy, data, trust is needed. How can we build up the system data free flow with trust? This is another important point. Well, former Prime Minister Abe, in the last year's Davos meeting, he explicitly used the term the data free flow with trust. And the G20 summit held in Osaka last year, this kind of discussion was made already. So the United States and Japan should lead the more concrete discussion on this point, how to realize data free flow with trust. And debt or balance sheet adjustment is also another important task. For example, now, airlines in the United States or United Airlines, American Airlines, in Japan, or Nippon Airways, the Japan Airlines are suffering very seriously from the capital shortage, maybe. So in the case of Germany, the government injected capital to Lufthansa. This is quite unusual. This cannot be possible. This is not possible in usual situations. Well, if German government support Lufthansa, while Air France will get angry. However, this is a very special occasion, COVID-19. So COVID-19 is was sometimes made as an excuse to have very special policy. So some special policy is needed for airlines. However, in the case of banking sector, the United States and Japan already have a legal framework. In what case government capital injection is needed? However, in other industries like airlines and some in other industries, we do not have any legal framework, no rules. If this kind of capital injection from the government was done in a very disorganized manner, this will destroy the market system. So in this regard, while US and Japan should discuss the basic rules for capital injection for the damaged industries, well, this is an important part of the excess debt problems, debt problems. And another issue is early small success. Well, what else could be the early small success? So it's a very difficult task. At this moment, I can say that reducing the cost of mobile phone is the most promising one. At the same time, he's proposing, for example, abolishing the stamp, Japan's Hanko income stamp system. Well, according to the research by the Cabinet Office, there are 1,800 cases, 1,800 cases where we need Hanko stamp. Well, Mr. Suga is reducing this number, 1,800, 1,000, no, I'm sorry, 18,000 Hanko cases. The government is going to reduce this only 100. So from here on, we do not need any stamp. Of course, stamp producers are strongly against that. It is understandable, but government already decided to reduce the cases which needs stamping Hanko. 18,000 cases. This will be reduced to 100 cases. If this is real, this will also become a very visible early small success.
Mm-hmm. That's all these things extremely interesting. If I might begin to turn to some of the interesting questions that we've been getting and maybe integrate these with our discussion. There's an awfully lot of things, of course, on the international side, as well as the very interesting things that you said domestically. You asked earlier about this question of decoupling. And broadly speaking, I guess we have the issue now of the system of trade organization in the Pacific and also globally in the wake of President Trump having left the TPP. And then, of course, after long negotiations, Japan went ahead with RCEP. And it, of course, I think was remarkably successful with CPTPP, considering that the United States pulled out of that and keeping the open trading system going. Now, of course, we're moving back to, I think, the United States. There are many in the United States who would like to see a movement back toward a more open economy. Of course, inequality in our domestic system have been rising. Certain areas, the Rust Belt, of course, has been hit badly by globalization. So I think we probably are in a somewhat different political situation even than what we were when TPP was originally concluded. But, you know, from the global economic point of view, of course, it's inevitable, perhaps there are trends in globalization that are unstoppable. Many of us feel, even if it's not pure globalization, at least interdependence is deepening, and we have to have some way to manage it. So, what I should ask, how do you see, or how do you think the Suga administration sees RCEP? And then you talked about a mega agreement. I remember many of our colleagues, some of my students were deeply involved in both the TPP and then the question of the extension to the Atlantic and the possibility of a TPP-centric mega agreement. But of course, the world is different now with TPP not having proceeded and now having the RCEP. How do you think the Suga administration sees this question of the mega agreement, or what are the next steps beyond RCEP? And many of us in the United States, of course, feel that perhaps this does, partly because of our own mistakes, but it does disadvantage the United States. And so what kind of a mega agreement do you think could be conceived that would both, create a place where we could cooperate on multilateral issues, but also that would be higher quality perhaps than the RCEP that we have now?
Well, thank you, Kent, again for raising another important question as well. What will be the attitude of Suga government on that point? At this moment, he doesn't say anything concrete on that point. However, based upon their activity as chief cabinet secretary, I guess the following scenario. Mr. Suga is very much interested in expanding mega FTA. Of course, it's not easy to realize that. The best scenario will be where the United States will come back to TPP. This is the most desirable scenario regarding mega TPP. And also regarding RCEP, well, maybe for the time being, he will focus RCEP. RCEP, as I mentioned, China is included, and Australia, New Zealand, and so included Vietnam. These countries are also included in both in CPTPP and the RCEP. So the unification of these countries will be very important to support mega FTA for both sides. And also still regrettably, in the case of RCEP, India was excluded. Well, if India was included in RCEP, this was a much more stronger power to promote mega FTA. However, India has its own domestic difficult problem. So in the very difficult negotiations, India left the agreement, but China was included. But still, the problem is the so-called, use the term quality. Quality of FTA is not very high. But still, some parts of the protectionism remained. So how to improve the quality of this RCEP from the viewpoint of free trade? This will be a very important task. And regarding RCEP, how can we invite India again? How to improve the quality of free trade, RCEP? This is the important task for the time being for Mr. Suga. Well, another kind of framework, at this moment, it's difficult to consider. But anyway, the most desirable scenario is that the United States is coming back to TPP.
Now, the question that some people are asking, and it occurs to me as well, as you talk about RCEP and various ways of improving it and relating India to it and so on, is the question of U.S.-Japan economic relations. one should suppose, and again, this partly is a result of the US pulling out of TPP. I understand that, but from a security point of view, of course, US-Japan relations are so important. If the economic relationship begins to erode as a result of the deepening of supply chains inside Asia through RCEP, then what to do on the US-Japan economic relations side to offset some of these impacts? How do you see that one?
Well, honestly, I do not have a very good answer on this kind of difficult question. But basically, the United States are, regarding US-Japan relations, Japanese big businesses, leading businesses, especially automobiles like Toyota, have been investing a lot to the United States. So, well, from this kind of investment, direct investment, US economy and Japanese economy are already integrated. So, well, this kind of effort will be continued. And on the other hand, for example, well, Japanese businesses are now reluctant to develop the supply chain with the China. Of course, some Japanese companies are still very much interested in to strengthen their supply chain with ASEAN countries. So this kind of effort will continue. And also regarding the United States, well, Japanese companies will also keep high direct investment so that we can be integrated. We can enjoy the deep integration of the economy through this kind of investment. So this is the only maybe possible way for that moment. And some people of the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry are too much emphasizing the importance of domestic production. Well, for example, this time face mask, we have been very much dependent on China production. So some important parts should be produced domestically. Well, from the viewpoint of security, to some extent, it's understandable, but this is partly denying the division of labor. So the division of labor still very important, but to enhance the economic efficiency. So we cannot deny this kind of supply chain or division of labor, international, well, let's say, yes, Bungyo Taisei in the division of labor. Well,
that's interesting that you would say that, Heizo, because that cuts rather differently, say, from what our Congress is stressing lately. As you probably know, the reshoring controversy has been very heated inside the U.S. that we don't produce enough face masks, and that we need to produce these things domestically. So I take it you're more of a free trader than many in the U.S. Congress. It doesn't surprise me. If I might maybe move on from that, just looking at the chat, I see we have a number of questions about demography. And of course, Japan is in the process of significant demographic change. Several people pointed out the budget strains arising from that. Some people say it's inevitable that the Japanese economy will decline due to the the graying of society. How does Prime Minister Suga look at this question of demographic change and what it means for Japan and what to do about it?
Well, it is quite true that demography is the one of the most serious problems for us. Well, in order to, however, keep the population, total fertility rate or birth rate should be around 2.1, right? Total fertility rate. However, in the case of Japan, this ratio became less than 2.0 40 years ago. 40 years ago. So at that time, well, we already understood that sooner or later, Japan total population will decline. And additionally, well, almost all Asian countries will suffer from this demographic problem. The birth rate in Japan is a total fertility rate is 1.4 in Japan. However, in Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, in all areas, the ratio is lower than that of Japan. So sooner or later, almost all Asian countries, only exception will be Philippines and Vietnam, all Asian countries will suffer from a similar problem. So, well, our solution is, in a sense, well, there could be, we do not have any magic stick type of very special good way. We should do many, many things. One is to accept foreign workers. Well, in the other administration, this kind of effort already started. Very regrettably, because of the COVID-19 crisis, this movement stopped. However, we need foreign labor. Otherwise, we cannot produce the agricultural product. We cannot produce any important products. So this is the accepting foreign labor. This is a important one. And also, according to the questionnaire survey, many young couples say we want to have two children. Two children they want to have, but still, because of some problems, this is not realized. Birth rate is 1.3 or 1.4. The reason is the lack of nursing care school, well, nursery school, lack in nursery school, and also because of the very inflexible labor system, mostly Japan-style lifetime employment seniority-based pay system. Women face some difficulties to realize both the family life and business life. So under such circumstances, former Prime Minister Abe and also new Prime Minister Suga are very eager to increase the number of nursery school and very kind, some grant to young families, etc., etc. So combining these, of course, still will suffer from the declining trend of the demography. So under such circumstances, maybe some regional cities are disappearing. So in order to revitalize the global economy, on the other hand, the aging of the demography is advancing. So one good way is, the senior people and the nursery care should move to the regional city, because this kind of cost is very cheap in the local city, but very high in the Tokyo, Osaka area. And if we can realize this kind of nursery care system in the regional city, in this case, well, even young people will also move seeking for jobs, and regional economy will be revitalized. Well, if the younger people move to the regional cities, in this case, birth rate is high in the regional cities compared with the Tokyo area, because, well, nursing cost is also, child care cost is also low in the local city. So these policies should be combined, but still, I'd like to say, the declining trend of the demography we cannot stop. So we have to cope with this kind of trend for the time being. And also during that time, we should accept more foreign workers to Japan. Also, very temporary visitors. Well, population have two times. One is how to say in English, 流動人口,
mobile population or fluid population, something like that.
Yes, mobile population or inhabitant population. Inhabitant population is declining, but sometimes the temporary accepting population should increase. This kind of combination is now expected. So inviting tourists is one of that. Inviting tourists in the Abe government, the number of inbound tourists increased by 4 times. So because of COVID-19, this kind of movement again stopped. But anyway, this combined effort is needed for Japan.
Yeah, thank you. You have, this is absolutely fascinating. It reminds me of old times, I must say. If I might, 2 or 3 questions domestically. First of all, from our professor of Japanese language, Professor Yasue Oguro. She's from Osaka, actually. And she was noting that the Ishin there was a referendum recently in Osaka on the possibility of promoting a super city. And she wonders whether the recent disapproval in the referendum is going to slow down the promotion of digitalization in Osaka. That was one question. Then another domestically related question had to do with postal privatization. And of course, I remember very well your conference with Prime Minister Koizumi and the key role that you played in privatization. And the question was how you would assess the current state of privatization, whether there could have been another way to have proceeded on that, or how you view that. We're now 15 years or so from that privatization itself. Then the third, and to me this is also very interesting, from one of our researchers, students, current students, Japanese students here, Mariko Togashi, having to do with economic security policy, which of course cuts across ministries. It has to do with, it could be certain defense elements, could be certain economic policy elements. And you've talked yourself about the Prime Minister's desire to reduce the stovepipes. So is Japan, how is Japan thinking about the question of national economic security in, for example, sanctions issues or issues that cut across both security and economics? Is there, is Japan moving toward a more integrated national economic security set of policies or institutions? So 3 questions that have to do with domestic side.
Okay, thank you very much again for raising 3 questions. In Osaka, I was born in Wakayama City near Osaka. I'm watching very carefully what has been happening in Osaka area. And also Mayor Matsui, Governor Yoshimura are both my good friends. So I'm expecting a lot, have been expecting a lot on the reform of Ishin Party. Very regrettably, their plan was denied the referendum. However, and also regrettably, Mayor Matsui stated to step down in about several years. But still, I think in the case of super city or digitalization, even Liberal Democratic Party Osaka is also supporting that. So of course, I expect the Ishin power will remain in that area. However, since even LDP, the rival party is also supporting that, even super smart city and digitalization, well, Osaka will realize this kind of reform, whatever the party will take power. This is my view. Second one, the postal privatization. Well, this is a very important question, I think. Well, according to the original schedule, postal privatization had been completed by 2017, 3 years ago. However, in 2009, DPJ, Democratic Party, took power. And at that time, the privatization law was changed, or in my term, watered down. Legislative framework was watered down. So as a result of that, since the selling the stock to the private sector was temporarily stopped. After Abe came back 7, 8 years ago, again the stock, their share was sold in the market, but still majority is still held by the government. And it is very important to take the governance by private sector. Well, there's a governance by public sector, governance by private sector. Well, governance by private sector is much better. This is the reason why we privatize. However, we are now just in between. So public sectors or government governance doesn't work, and the private sector governance doesn't work. This is the reason why, at this moment, this is a very unstable situation. So what should be done is very clear: to sell stocks in the market completely. Well, the reason why the stock pace is very slow, its stock price is low. It doesn't matter. Even if the price is low, this stock should be sold in the market. Through that, the very strong governance system by private sector should be realized. This is what should be done. And this year, next year, the second round, the third round of midterm plan is going to be announced from the Japan Post. So in this plan, at this point, so selling the stock in the market as soon as possible should be and will be listed. I believe so. And national security and the issue, economic security issue is very important. Well, at this moment, well, especially regarding data, well, China has a big data, and some gigantic Chinese companies are purchasing some Japanese companies, etc., etc. In that sense, many politicians, especially conservative politicians, are becoming very nervous about that. Well, of course, economic freedom, it should be respected. At the same time, in some area where security concern is needed, this is well understood by Prime Minister Suga, I believe. So, well, we need rules. We need some rules. We should not be so nationalistic. We should not be so nationalistic. At the same time, completely free economy is impossible. So for some important, for example, land, for example, with water resources, etc., so this should be reserved by domestic companies, domestic entities, and also in some industries. Well, some industries, some domestic dominant power is needed. Well, of course, specifically, we have so many difficult problems, but in principle, this kind of idea is held by Prime Minister and the ruling parties, mainstream people.
Thank you very much. I see just lots and lots of questions bubbling up, and we don't have a lot of time. If I might just flag three of the important ones briefly, and if you could make some final comments. One of them had to do with foreign direct investment into Japan, the promotion of investment. Eguchi-san, one of our former fellows, he said, the government is tightening foreign exchange regulations to block foreign investment for national security reasons. So what's the fate of foreign investment coming into Japan? Another one from Nakano-san has to do with nuclear power. Japan has committed itself to zero emissions by 2050. Doesn't that require building nuclear plants, and could it get the public's understanding of that? And then finally, and I think this is an interesting one to conclude on in a way, the free and open Indo-Pacific policies, which of course Prime Minister Abe stressed, and so did the Trump administration. Question is, advice to Biden as to what to do on the Indo-Pacific, because that is may come up when the two of them, Prime Minister Suga and the president, to be talk. Sorry about so many questions. Let me say how much we appreciate your input.
Well, thank you again. Well, about FDA. FDA foreign direct investment to Japan. This is a
Yeah.
question to Japan. Well, still the amount of FDI foreign direct investment in Japan is quite limited. It is true. There could be several reasons, but this is not because of the foreign exchange act problem. This is mostly the various kind of domestic regulations. Well, regulation and high tax rate. Well, now the Hong Kong is in trouble, and some money, some human resources are leaving Hong Kong to Singapore. We expect that some of them will come to Tokyo. We're expecting that, but still consider the tax rate, income tax rate. The highest rate is 51%, 55% in Japan, and 15% in Singapore. So many financiers do not have an incentive to come to Tokyo. So this kind of deregulation and the high income tax rate is the obstacle for foreign direct investment, in my understanding. And the nuclear power plant, this is a very touchy issue. But the other day, in the policy board of the government, at that time, Minister Koizumi, Minister of Environment, attended. I suggested him to create the roadmap to 2050. Roadmap, how to realize emission-free by 2050. We do not know. Target is there and current situation there, but no roadmap. In that process, well, nuclear power plant can play to some extent to reduce the emission. However, I do not expect new power plant to be built. It's very difficult considering the human sentiment, the people's sentiment. So now some existing nuclear power plant should be used for some years or so. However, I do not expect that the new nuclear plant will be built. I do not expect that. But anyway, roadmap to 2050 is needed. In this roadmap, this kind of process will be explicitly discussed. And free and open Indo-Pacific, what should we do? Well, the other day, Prime Minister Suga made a phone call to Mr. Biden. And at that time, Mr. Suga mentioned Senkaku Island. This is a national border issue. And well, so from the viewpoint of Japan, this kind of commitment from the United States to this area, to security and even the national border problem to this area, we are expecting a lot. And for that purpose, various kind of cooperation could be possible. And well, Japan is already paying a very important high cost for the US base in Japan. So this kind of effort will be continued. But regarding Indo-Pacific problem, well, there's some stability, security issue, including Senkaku Island, is highly expected from Japan side.
Well, Heizo, I must say, thinking back to our common experiences so many years ago, and as you will remember, Professor Reischauer always stressed the importance of dialogue, and the broken dialogue with Japan was one of his greatest personal concerns. And overcoming that dialogue is something that he devoutly hoped for and wished for. And the things you've said today and your career, it seems to me, of cooperation and dialogue across the Pacific and around the world has contributed so much to that. So this is very much in the tradition of Reischauer. And I personally, I want to deeply thank you on behalf of all of us here at the Reischauer Center for your comments today, and look forward to seeing you again in a better world as COVID begins to wane.
Well, thank you very much, Kent, and all participants. I really appreciate your patience. I enjoyed the discussion with you. I really hope to see you soon directly uh, after COVID crisis is over. Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.